Hey there, and welcome to a special election night edition of Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Brandon Johnson wins the race for Chicago Mayor. Paul Vallas concedes, as the current results have Johnson ahead with 99% of precincts reporting.
So joining us now from the election night headquarters of the two candidates are Amanda Vinicky and Nick Blumberg. And Nick, we're going to kick it off with you tonight. You're reporting live from what has turned out to be a victory party for Brandon Johnson at his election night headquarters.
It sure has, and supporters here are clearly in a very good mood tonight. The music has been loud and upbeat. A lot of excited folks eagerly awaiting Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson to come out and make a speech to his crowd of supporters. We're here with one of them now, Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul, who's been backing Commissioner Johnson, I imagine, with a decisive victory. This has got to feel very exciting for you.
This is very exciting, and I have to be honest, this is still a close decision with the split Chicago on it. So it's a time to bring people together, and I think Brandon is a personality to do that. I think he realizes he's got a huge burden ahead of him to bring people together. This is a divisive election. A lot of negatives thrown, and I want everybody to give Brandon a chance. Not to define Brandon by the negative commercials we've seen over the last few weeks, but by the man he will seek to prove that he is in leading Chicago to a better place.
Yeah, with the polling so close, even in recent days, were you at all surprised that it is what appears to be a relatively decisive win for him?
I'm not, because of the type of candidacy and campaign that Brandon ran. It's if you look at the room here, it's a diverse room that represents what the city of Chicago is. He got votes from all across the city, and that takes work. That takes a ground game, that takes organizing. That's who he naturally is, and that's what democracy is about, making sure all voices speak out as to what they want to see in the future of the city of Chicago. One of the things I want to say real quick, I've heard stories of the sky's going to fall and police officers are going to leave the police department and so forth. I mean, if you're a police officer who's taking an oath and you're going to leave because of who was elected mayor, then you weren't committed to the job in the first place. Now, I think Brandon has a burden of reaching out to people who were his adversaries and bringing people together. I want to congratulate Paul Vallas for running a competitive race, and congratulate all candidates that declared themselves a candidate. And I think people, whether they supported Paul or whether they supported Brandon, need to come together after today in the interest of the city of Chicago.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot ahead of him. This is just step one for now Mayor-elect Johnson. But Attorney General Kwame Raoul, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And we will have more here from Johnson campaign headquarters. Like we said, a very eager crowd awaiting his victory speech tonight here at the Marriott Marquis. For now, back to you.
Thanks, Nick. And Brandon Johnson is expected to address supporters in the media very soon, and we will bring you some of those comments when he does. But for now, we go to Amanda, who is reporting live tonight from the Paul Vallas election night headquarters. Amanda, Vallas just gave his concession speech. What's the mood there right now?
Yes, Paris, there were supposed to be bagpipe players. Instead, they have left the premises. We didn't get a whole lot of dancing or jubilation. Instead, I've seen folks hugging, a lot of frowns. And then as Vallas exited the stage, you had a lot of people seeking to shake his hand, get their photo with him, presumably saying thank you. In his remarks, he began really by saying that he still believes that there are brighter days ahead for Chicago, that they're on the horizon. And he said that what's necessary now is for residents of the city to put aside their differences. Let's hear some more of what he had to say, including what he told Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson.
I ran for mayor to bring the city together, and it's clear, based on the results tonight, that the city is deeply divided. So tonight, even though, of course, we believe every vote should be counted, I called Brandon Johnson and told him that I absolutely expect him to be the next mayor of Chicago. And please, it's critically important I mean, this campaign that I ran to bring the city together would not be a campaign that fulfilled my ambitions if this election is going to divide us more. So it's critically important that we use this opportunity to come together, and I've offered him my full support.
And I'm joined now by one of Vallas' supporters, and that is Alderman Brian Hopkins. So given that it is not going to be a mayor of Vallas, what do you believe is next for the city?
Well, I think that the city has to come together and get past the divisiveness that this campaign really highlighted on both sides. You know, I know the victory speech that Paul Vallas would have made had the results been different, and it was a call to come together. It was a call to unite, to face the challenges that we have as a city and get a consensus on what needs to happen going forward.
How can there be a consensus? The differences are so very vast in terms of solutions to crime, to policing, to money, and how it can be raised for community investment.
How do you come together? I'll give you an example of it right now. Mayor-elect Johnson, I congratulate you, and as a member of the City Council, I look forward to working with you on your team to address the challenges that we face, to solve the problems that we deal with, and to make the city that we love thrive again. And I'm ready to do it. It's easy to do when you really believe in the city that you live in, and we all have to come together and get past the divisiveness and the bitterness of this race.
In our last 20 seconds or so, what do you make of the results, and what is that in terms of the pulse of residents?
Well, it was so close. You know, 49% of the voters agreed with Paul Vallas' vision for Chicago. So, you know, it could have gone either way. These were two very different ideas that were out there, and we'll have to see how it plays out. But, you know, we all want the same thing. We want a healthy, thriving city with a safety on our streets and good schools.
Once again, that was Alderman Brian Hopkins calling also for consensus and working together and working with Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson. With that, we'll be back with more later. Back to you in the studio.
Amanda, thank you. And of course, we'll check back in with both Amanda and Nick later in the program. As we said earlier, still expecting to hear from Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson this evening.
And first, some more top headlines tonight. History made: Donald Trump becomes the first former president of the United States to be criminally indicted. Trump pled not guilty in New York District Court to 34 felony charges, alleging he falsified business documents to conceal hush money payments, including to former porn star Stormy Daniels. New York District Attorney Alvin Bragg says his office conducted a thorough investigation before deciding to bring these charges.
Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about.
Meanwhile, Trump spoke out about the case later this evening at his Mar-a-Lago home in Florida.
The Chicago Fire Department is mourning the death of a veteran firefighter who died while fighting a multi-home blaze in West Pullman.
Then, Lord, I'm asking you to be with Jermaine's statesmen, and those men and women who served beside him.
The department said a prayer for 49-year-old Jermaine Pelt, who served 18 years as a firefighter. The fire commissioner says Pelt was on a hose fighting the fire and went down as crews were being ordered out of the house. The fire broke out at a home near 120th and Wallace Streets and spread to neighboring homes. Pelt joined the department in 2005 and leaves behind 2 children. 2 other firefighters were injured and are in stable condition.
Some more sad news to report tonight. Congressman and former candidate for mayor Jesus Chuy Garcia announces his 28-year-old daughter Rosa has died. A statement shared on Twitter reads, quote, "Our family is completely heartbroken. Rosa joined our family as a young girl who had been in the foster care system. We did our best to provide a stable, loving, and welcoming home for her." Goes on to ask for privacy and prayers.
A lockout has been lifted at Highland Park High School this afternoon after a student reportedly brought a gun to class. 5 students there were reportedly apprehended in connection with the incident that occurred this morning. There were no reports of shots fired as the school went on lockdown 9 months after the massacre at the town's 4th of July parade that resulted in 7 deaths and multiple injuries.
Coming up in the program, we check back in with Amanda Vinicky and Nick Blumberg, who are reporting live from the Paul Vallas and Brandon Johnson election night headquarters.
But first, voter turnout on this stormy election day. We break down the numbers right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
The words of this election day are turnout and weather. Here to talk about both is Max Bever, Director of Public Information for the Chicago Board of Elections. Max, welcome back. Long day for you, I know. So let's take a look at some of the numbers. More than 558,000 people voted in this election. That's about 35% of the city's registered voters, and only about 4% of the total votes cast were by people between the ages of 18 and 24, Max. So let's talk about those outstanding mail-in ballots in what was a close race. It has now been called. But April 18th is the cutoff for them to be counted. It sounds like whatever the outstanding ballots remain, not enough to change the outcome of this election, though.
That's right. A lot has changed in the last 3 hours. The interviews that I was giving 3 hours ago are changing now. But a lot of attention and eyes will still be on the outstanding ballots that we have left. As of last night, heading into Election Day, we had over 91,000 outstanding vote-by-mail ballots. Now, we don't expect all of those to arrive back to the board properly postmarked or on time, or voters choosing to vote. If we look at the February 28th election, we went into that one with 100,000 outstanding ballots. Vote-by-mail ballots. We got 52,000 back in that 2-week period for election code that we have to count them. So we'll probably have a similar return rate. At this point, it doesn't look like it's affecting the mayoral race, but for the alderperson races, especially for the 29th ward, it's going to make a big difference, and they'll probably be watching those daily vote-by-mail totals come back in.
Max, are you surprised by the low turnout by young voters, especially since Brandon Johnson targeted those voters?
Unfortunately not. The voters aged 18 through 24 has been a stubbornly consistent low turnout for decades for municipal elections. Young voters, they really do show up for presidential years. We see that age bracket turnout at 60, 70, even 80% for presidential years. They turn out for midterms too. But for some reason, the municipal elections and the local elections do not really drive that 18 to 24 turnout. Where we did see a difference from the February 28th election, though, is for voters aged 25 to 44. We saw a lot more voting today on Election Day, as well as during early voting, compared to February 28th. Those ages 25 to 74 were a lot more evened out than what we saw in February 28th, where voters 55 and up were driving more of those results.
Max, we've got about 30 seconds left. Weather, how much do you think that affected turnout today?
So we sure were worried about the storms that were predicted. We made that warning to people, and man, did people show up yesterday for early voting. We broke a new municipal record with over 30,000 people voting on one day. However, we were grateful to see that most of the severe weather didn't affect the election today. However, we did have a pretty nasty thunderstorm rolling in around 1:30 through 2:30, which seemed to cause a little bit of a dip in turnout during those hours for Election Day. But people started turning back out again from 3 o'clock. We saw a regular surge of Election Day voters heading into 7 p.m. for polls close.
Okay, about a third of registered voters turning out today. Max Bever, Chicago Board of Elections, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Now, Paris, back to you.
Brandis, what went wrong for Paul Vallas? What went right for Brandon Johnson? As you heard, the AP has declared Brandon Johnson the winner of the 2023 Chicago mayoral race, and Paul Vallas has conceded for the most part. With nearly 99% reporting, Johnson has a 3% and 16,000 vote lead with tens of thousands of mail-in ballots yet to be counted, as you just heard, but it won't change the outcome as Vallas has indeed taken the stage to concede, and Johnson has declared victory. And joining us now to unpack the day's events are political speechwriter, debate strategist, and senior lecturer at Northwestern University, Jason DeSanto, and our very own political reporter, Heather Sharon. And we should note we are standing by for Brandon Johnson to make his victory speech. We're hearing that CTU President Stacey Davis Gates is addressing the crowd, so as soon as he takes the stage, we will go to him. But Heather Sharon, the polls had Vallas up by a little bit. What made the difference today?
Well, you know, we're going to have to take a deep look at sort of the detailed results. So we don't know exactly what happened, but my sense is that this race was won on the ground, and that it was the volunteers that took to the streets, that knocked doors, that encouraged people to send in vote by mail application and to return those ballots, that really made the difference for Johnson. Right now, as you said, the margin of victory is about 16,000 votes. We do know that about 20,000 young people voted today who did not apparently vote back in February. And if that turns out to sort of be the case, that could prove determinative.
Those voters look to be overwhelmingly
Yes.
Brandon Johnson supporters. Jason DeSanto, it seemed like the messaging strategy here for Vallas was to kind of hold your fire. Johnson was pretty aggressive against Vallas. Vallas sort of taking the high road until a little later on in the campaign. If you're a part of the Vallas campaign, do you regret that strategy now?
I don't think so, and I'm not sure that's exactly what happened here, Paris. I mean, it's true. When we were sitting here several weeks ago on the first night of this runoff, it was Brandon Johnson who attacked a lot more that first night. But if you were looking just 2, 3, even 4 weeks ago, Paul Vallas was running 4 ads. 2 of those were positive ads. 2 of them were negative ads, going right after defund the police.
Was it too late to go for that strategy is what I'm saying? Should he have gone for that right away?
It may have made some sense to go there a little bit earlier, but the amount of money that he was putting up at the stage that he was putting up, I'm not sure it would have made any difference if he had gone right away or not. I think the major issue that happened here was that what Johnson was able to do was do what good campaigns do. You motivate the committed and you persuade the persuadable. I mean, Heather talked a little bit about getting out the vote in terms of motivating the committed. He also was kind of a bold and inspirational candidate. He didn't back off on a lot of things that he had been saying. I think that was inspiring to the followers. And in terms of persuading the persuadable, I think he just built trust. I think he didn't seem as radical as Vallas was trying to paint him. And by the same token, he was able to raise enough questions about Vallas to diminish Vallas just enough to get over the finish line.
And Vallas tried to raise questions about his associations with the Chicago Teachers Union. He is a CTU organizer. We are seeing live right now the president of the CTU, Stacey Davis Gates, address the crowd before Brandon Johnson takes the stage. Heather Sharon, what about the aldermanic races? A fairly good night for incumbents who were appointed to the position by Mayor Lightfoot over the last year.
That's right. It appears that 2 Asian American women have been elected to the city council. Lena Mana Hoppenworth in the 48th Ward has apparently won, and Alderman Nicole Lee in the 11th Ward is the first Chinese American to be elected to the city council. So it was a good night for them, along with Alderman Monique Scott and Alderman Timmy Knudsen in the 43rd Ward, but this was a great night for progressive organizations in Chicago.
Great night for progressive organizations. So you had those organizations pouring money into these races, but you also had a more centrist, center-left organization like Get Stuff Done PAC pouring money. They're touting some of their victories. So where are the fault lines in city council now as it relates to ideology, moderate versus far left?
So you're going to have a much larger and more robust progressive caucus that will be feeling like they not only got all of the candidates that are associated with the Democratic Socialists of America re-elected to the city council. They added Angela Clay in the 46th Ward. She won. And they now have Brandon Johnson in that mayor's seat. It is a new day for them. However, there were a number of alder people who will be more centrist and moderate to get re-elected, like Timmy Knudsen and Nicole Lee, along with Peter Chico in the 10th Ward, who has declared victory. He is a Chicago police officer who will now sort of be part of that more conservative group on the city council.
All right, Jason DeSanto, Lori Lightfoot, Chuy Garcia finished 3rd and 4th respectively. Does it look like Brandon Johnson persuaded the majority of those voters to come over to his side here?
Well, to Heather's point earlier, I don't think we're going to know until we actually look at the data itself that came out. Maybe it's a little premature to say. What is interesting is that in the areas where neither Johnson nor Vallas had won, those areas actually have worse crime than the areas which those 2 candidates did win, which meant that the crime issue was going to be crucial in those areas. And what the initial numbers would indicate is probably that Johnson was able to hold his own on that particular issue.
Maybe Johnson's message resonated on crime with those voters.
I think the one thing he was able to do on crime, Paris, that was interesting and that really goes to the points I was making earlier about building trust, on the defund issue, I mean, here's video of him saying something that seems to be positive about defund the police. And really, what he did with that was to take it and say that this was a typical Republican attack. And so I think if you were a progressive and you were wondering whether or not Johnson was somebody you could support, that was a kind of a response to that attack that might in some way move you to vote for Johnson. That's not going to get all those votes, but it might have gotten some of them.
All right, well, we're going to go to Brandon Johnson campaign headquarters, where, as you can see, the mayor-elect of the city of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, has taken the stage. Let's listen into his remarks.
Mayor Brandon Johnson!
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Chicago, how the heck are you? You know, they said this would never happen. So, you know, if they didn't know, now they know. There's so many people who are responsible for this moment, and I'd like to thank and take a second to thank those individuals. You know, but first, I want to make sure that I say this. The first thing that I want to say is to the Chicagoans who did not vote for me. Here's what I want you to know. Here's what I want you to know. That I care about you. I value you. And I want to hear from you. I want to work with you. And I'll be the mayor for you too.
Yes!
Because this campaign has always been about building a better, stronger, safer Chicago for all the people of Chicago. And when I say all the people, I mean all the people, especially folks who have ever been on a payment plan. So from Lincoln Park to Humboldt Park, from Jefferson Park to Garland Park, there are so many people that made this possible. Of course, I want to thank my God. Aren't you glad, Chicago, that we serve a God who was at the beginning and the end?
Hallelujah.
And of course, to my family, my wife, Stacy, I love you, baby. To my 3 children, Owen, Ethan, and Braden. And of course, to HCII, SCIU, SCIU 73, to the CTU, to the CCTU, to the IFT, the AFT, the UWF, because make no mistake about it, Chicago is a union town. I want to thank the board president, Tony Preckwinkle, the attorney general, Kwame Raoul, Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, Congressman Jonathan Jackson, and then, of course, the Congressman Danny K. Davis. But I also want to give a special thanks to someone who could not be here tonight. And we are praying for you, Congressman Garcia. Chewy, we love you, brother. And to the over the 70 elected officials from across the country. But I also want to thank Paul Vallas for running for office, as difficult as it was. We want to thank you for your service, Paul. Chicago, tonight is just the beginning. With our voices and our votes, we have ushered in a new chapter in the history of our city. The truth is, the people have always worked for Chicago. Whether you wake up early to open the doors of your businesses, or teach middle school, or wear a badge to protect our streets, or nurse patients in need, or provide child care services, you have always worked.
And that's Brandon Johnson, elected today, this evening, as the next mayor of Chicago. Obviously, we'll be hearing a lot more from him in the coming weeks, months, years. Meanwhile, that is our show for this election night. Much more tomorrow night, right here at 10. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great election night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.
These adorable, seemingly passive fur balls are in fact the ultimate survivors. Within their bite-sized frame lies a fighter, able to outwit the many predators that surround them. From frozen forests to concrete jungles, we take you deep into their changing world. We'll reveal just how remarkable rabbits really are.
Wednesday at 7 on WTTW.
Giant craters were spotted in Russia.
The frozen world of permafrost is melting,
The ground exploded.
releasing planet-warming gases.
There's a huge amount of methane and natural gas trapped in the permafrost.
What will it mean for our climate?
It's a scary wild card in the climate change story. Could